Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we get started, are you thinking of creating a podcast or are you a podcast host already? As a podcast strategist, I can help you to launch or relaunch a purposeful and profitable podcast which will inspire, entertain and educate a global audience. Simply book in a one-to-one call with me right now via the Calendly link in the show notes, and together we'll focus on the purpose of your podcast. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by James Dean. Welcome, James.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
And with a name like that, I'm going to be really impressed, I'm sure.
Well, we'll see if I live up to it.
I'm sure you get that all the time, so apologies for that.
Not at all. It comes with the territory. I'm well able for it.
And I'm sure your parents knew what they were doing when they chose the name.
Would they tell me it wasn't intentional in any way? But sure, we'll trust them with that.
Fair enough. So tell me, well, what is it you're doing at the moment, James?
Thanks, Amy. So at the moment, I'm in the, you would say, infancy of creating my own life coaching business. And that's where I'm really focusing on. It's focusing on working with clients, working with people. But I suppose it's really, and this is really apt in the sense of talking to you, is for the last number of months, is really getting into, well, what is the purpose of me being a coach? What's the sort of coach I want to be? Who are the sort of people I want to work with? So getting into coaching is something wanting to do full time for the last couple of years. And it's really getting to a stage now where I've, through an evolution, I feel I'm almost up to another sort of point in that sort of process, and really starting to make personal headway, which is starting to have an impact on the people that I'm connecting with and working with. And that's where it's really coming in for me, in a sense of one of the biggest things I sense of what I'm working at the moment is conversation, as opposed to trying to have it that coaching. And that's what's really sort of a thing important for me at the moment but it's really about conversation and connecting with people. And because when you do get that real connection with someone, that's when you can really start to have an impact as a coach. But it's really about having that conversation initially. And it was one of those things when I started, similar, a bit further behind you, but started my own podcast recently. And when I was chatting to people, and I was asking myself the questions, or why do I want to do this? What's the purpose of me doing this podcast? And it was pure conversation. And I find that a really interesting subject to just, like yourself, have conversations with people and what can come out of those conversations. And what's quite interesting from a lot of the people I've spoken to, whether it be from people I've spoken to my own podcast or for the people that I'm working with on a coaching capacity, is this sense of everyone, a lot of people saying, I just want to be myself, or I want to, find myself, but not even find myself, I want to be myself. And I was really interested to see, well, what does that actually mean to people? What does being yourself actually look like? Because it's different for every one of us. And that's a really big focus for me at the moment, from a personal perspective, in a sense of what does that look like to me? But also when I'm coaching or talking to someone, I'm like, well, what does it mean to you to be yourself? And what does it mean to be, there's this theme I'm sort of seeing as well at the moment from working with people, is this almost sort of dichotomy, in a sense of a clash of people who are seeing themselves or have success in their lives and being successful, but yet unfulfilled. And there's sort of like, if we go with the sort of cliche of boxes ticked of things that we've achieved or things that we've attained. But then so many people I've spoken to, they've worked through a career or worked through a certain sort of job remit and then got to a point and gone, I'm not sure I actually am getting much out of this anymore, barring maybe the finances, which is of course not to be dismissed or ruled out. But I think there's a limit to a lot of people of what that actually they can take in some ways and think, well, actually, I'm missing something. And it's that something that also really intrigues me because I can completely resonate with those people. I suppose from my journey from going into this sort of setting up this business in sense of becoming a coach is I've had similar paths to so many people. Whereas I did have a previous job and career within the financial service industry that I didn't set out to have. You know, the job was taken in my early 20s more out of necessity than desire. And again, I was actually quite successful in that role and in that company. I spent 16 years in the same company and, you know, achieved quite a lot, had a good brand within the company. I was known quite well. Was a subject matter expert in my particular field. I could have carried on within that company or in that industry and probably had a very quote unquote successful career. But I had this thing in my head, and it's this like when it comes to sort of why you want to do something, it takes a bit of time to actually work that out sometimes. And it's almost like that scratching the itch in your brain that you can't quite scratch. That's sort of when people say, oh, I really love to do that. So one of my things when I'm thinking back over a number of years was, and it's just so apt, it was just on this weekend, was the London Marathon was just on over the weekend. And I remember watching it, you know, every year growing up, because it was probably one of the first things when I was, you know, growing up, it was like, it was always on telly, you know, in sense of sport, like live sport, it was the London Marathon. And it was always one of the things I'd love to do that one day. I'd love to do that one day. But he did nothing about it. But it was this, I couldn't quite tell you, well, why did I want to run 26.2 miles? You know, it does sound madness. But I got to a point when it was in sort of 2013 where it's like, I am just going to do this and I'm just going to see what happens. Took away the sort of excuses or reasons not to do something and just went into it to see what will happen. And it's those moments of like, when you actually manage to scratch that itch, it kind of goes, oh, it really instantly makes you think, well, what else could I do? And it opens your mind to think, what are the other things that I have I been putting off? What are the other things that I really had an interest in that I thought that I couldn't do? And from going into marathons, I went on to do a huge amount of other stuff and sort of like my own sort of physical sort of challenges and stuff. But one of the biggest things that it probably enabled me to do was to, as we see it now from a coaching perspective, is like that whole idea of a limiting belief. So I actually came across the term and the sort of idea of a life coach when I was about 26. In that previous job that I mentioned, I was sort of team leading, that sort of level. And I was suggested to go on to what was the management course of the time, you know, to sort of promote and sort of develop the next sort of level of managers within the company. So it was a 3-day training course, and it was fine, but the usual sort of stuff with Myers-Briggs and all these personality type tests that anyone who's been in the corporate world has done. But one of the people who was delivering the course, who was a guest sort of lecturer, if you want to call it, was this chap, and he was a master life coach. And I just never had sort of heard the term before. And I was like, oh, that sounds quite interesting. And I, at the time, looked it up and read about it and thought about it. But what I know now was this limiting belief of like, well, who's going to listen to a 26-year-old life coach? That's literally what I was telling myself. So I was like, well, that was him. And this was the same sort of process thought process I would have had. Well, well, I'm not a marathon runner. That's what those people are marathon runners. Those people are life coaches. I'm the I'm the guy who just works here, and I'll just keep my head down and just carry on. But when I went through that sort of, as I say, go back to that, scratch the itch of the marathon, and it made me think about other stuff. And I went on from then. I went on this sort of path of difference where like I'd always had an interest in physical fitness and physical working, physical activity. So I retrained as a personal trainer. I thought, well, I'll give this a go and I'll see how this works. And I did that, and I worked in a gym part-time along with the full-time job. I did that for 2 years and thoroughly enjoyed it, but still wasn't really getting to this sort of, well, what's the purpose? I found the sort of fitness industry at that time a little bit one-dimensional. It was still quite focused on numbers. It was only sort of about like the numbers on the scale going down, the number of inches being reduced. They're all positive things, but quite to me, I was like, there's so much more from my own sort of going through sort of improving my health and fitness through running and marathon running. It's like, well, there's so much more to this than just smaller clothes. So there's so much more of a development in sense of what you're getting from this. So literally almost 10 years later, I went back and thought, right, I'm going to give this life coaching a go. It literally took me 10 years almost to then discover what I'd had was this belief, or this limiting belief about myself, that I couldn't, or who would listen to me. I'm not this sort of, I'm not that type of person. That's what other people do. So in a sense of what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to get people to think about, well, what's the thing that you're trying to scratch? What's the thing in your head that keeps playing over and over again, saying, I'd love to try that. I'd love to do this, and enable them to have the opportunity to give it a go. Because to me as well, it's like the most interesting people I've spoken to as well, they've tried a number of different things. They've gone, actually, I tried that and it didn't work out. I'm going to try something else. And it did. And even if it did work out, I'm still going to try something else. And it's that sort of trying to give people that opportunity to see what happens. That's really where I'm coming from at the moment.
Wow. That was a great answer to a fairly simple question, but it's really interesting, isn't it? When you just sort of have an open question, how so much can just come from it. And what's really curious to me is being a coach is all about asking great questions. And you probably didn't realize that that was the case 10 years prior. And the whole thinking of a life coach, well, they need to be really experienced in life. Well, they need to be experiencing questions and listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and it's that sort of, it's a really good point in the sense of that questioning and listening, because when I was thinking about this recently. I think my sort of my business mentor that I work with, she often talks about sort of like, what's your superpower? What's the thing that you find really easy to do that you almost take for granted? And it's one of those things that I do find, especially talking to people and people opening up to me quite easily. I just have, people will literally can just start telling me anything and everything. And because they're sort of like innate wanting to listen to people. And it's really true in a sense of like, what I was stopping myself was in my own head. And as opposed to thinking, oh, I've got to have all this experience, versus having the ability to listen to people, but actually allow them to be heard, not just listening for the sake of it, actually giving them the opportunity to talk. And when actually I think back now on that sort of 10-year period, or that whole time I had my career, that's exactly what I was doing. I was that person that people came and talk to, whether it should be with a difficult, work query, as we call it, or just something going on. So it's only when you look back and you realize, oh, I was doing it the whole time.
And it's curious, isn't it, that you were on this path in your career and you're really well known and becoming a subject matter expert in something, and you're going narrower and narrower and narrower into a niche, into a space. But actually, it was the diversity that you were seeking in life.
Completely. And it's a really, really good point, because very much in a sense of that sort of niche that I was carving for myself within that company, you couldn't get, it was very, couldn't get much more niche. It was like I was a product expert, but in one particular product that wasn't even sold anymore. It's like a historical legacy product. And I was the kind of, you would have put it, the customer service from that perspective expert on it. Like if there was a question that needed to be answered within the whole customer service department about this product, this process, I was the person. So it gave me, as you say, that great sort of known for in an organization, but generally for one thing from a work perspective. And the diversity piece is quite interesting, because when I started to get into the sort of like the running, for example, within the for myself, at the time the company started to do some sort of well-being sort of activities, and one of them was a couch to 5K. So I was like, well, I've run marathons now. I'll take people out. They were doing a sort of big event, in 3 months' time or whatever it was, hiring a venue. We're going to get people active and get them to do 5K. So I was like, well, I'll help people I'll do a program. I'll do a running program. So I got involved in that. And then I started, when I qualified in personal training, and said I was working part-time in the gym, but I was like, I'll do some fitness classes for the wellbeing program as well. So I started to diversify, but not in the work capacity, if that made sense. So I started, and then when I qualified, I was still working when I qualified as a coach as well. And just at the time, it so happened that there was a coaching practice, a coaching circle created in the company. It's like, right, I'm going to get involved in that. So I started to get known across the company and across the wider things for other things than just my expertise within the field that I was known for. And I met so many more people at different levels, at different parts of the organizations, in so many different capacities, that I was actually now known for different things. And then I started to do, workshops. I started to do presentations, personal development, if you want to call them, things that I'd learned through coaching. I was like, well, and started to be able to go to different sites in the company and present and share stuff. So that, you're absolutely right. That sort of looking for that diversity enabled me to not just expand my own experience, but the people that I met as well. And they knew me for something different, which was a really pleasant thing to have.
And share with me about the necessity over desire, James.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Necessity over desire. Yeah, I have to think about that for a second. I suppose the necessity piece, if it's something that's necessary or necessity, that sometimes has a sort of it's a need it's something that just needs to be done. And versus the desire, I would see as something that I would want to achieve. And the things like, I think of it, the way I can think of necessity is, I think of it sometimes as, well, what's the most basic things that need to be done for you order to achieve what you want to achieve? What's what are the most sort of basic things that you want to have in your life, the foundations that you want to have in order to move forward? And I come into this thing of like, sometimes I have this, when I'm struggling for something, if I can't understand where I'm trying to focus, or if I'm procrastinating about something, I ask myself the question is, what's important now? Right now. And that usually finds me what's necessary. What's the necessity at that moment? Because I think there's a balance between the two as well. Sometimes necessity can be seen as something that I should do. and it can put an obligation on you if you think of it in that way. And and sometimes the desire can be seen as the sort of, oh, that's the shiny thing, and it's sort of, oh no, that's all about the passion and the dream, where it's like, well, actually, if you have too much of one thing, you can get bogged down in either. So if all you think about is the necessity, it'll get into those shoulds, and you'll get sort of feel obligated, and you'll be really sort of, you can almost start torturing yourself in a sense of like just whirlwind of procrastination. But if you only think of the desire, and you only think of the moonshot, and you only think of that really, really high level thing, you're not going to be almost satisfied with having to go through the necessity. And you're going to think it's so unattainable that you just give up. So like, say if I give the example again of, say, like the marathon again, the desire was to complete a marathon. But if I just went straight out and tried to run a marathon, the body, which I did, which I tried, I was like, oh, I'm going to go start running. And I just thought, well, my idea of running was, I'll run as hard as I can, as fast as I can every night, and try and go quicker than the next time. And of course, within a fortnight, I had shin splints and all sorts of stuff wrong with my legs. So the desire, it wasn't like the desire wasn't there to complete that marathon, but the necessity was going through the process. The necessity was having to put in the work, the research, whether you would call it the boring stuff, but it's the important stuff as well. So you got to have a balance between the two, because if you go one way or the other, I think you end up still not getting what you actually wanted.
So tell me, what's important to you now?
To be asked my own question is great, isn't it? What's important to me now is like, it actually is, that question is really asking people that question themselves. But for myself, it is actually getting back to the things that I've probably been neglecting over the last couple of years. So as I've been going through a huge amount of transition over the last couple of years. So 2 years ago, I moved house. During the pandemic, I thought, let's make this a bit more interesting. Try and move, not just move house, but move counties in Ireland. Then last year, after I, left a job that I had for 16 years, decided to do a huge amount of renovations on my house, for 6 months. So I was going through a lot of these sort of transitions, and then into this one at the moment of trying to build this business. And I suppose then through all of that, I've probably left some stuff, or not been doing some stuff that actually got me here in the first place. So going back to that question, or that thing I said at the beginning of what, people being themselves, or maybe actually doing the things that were important to me before are still just as important, but I'm not practicing them. So it's things like getting back into my own physical fitness, reading back into the books that I was reading the whole time. I suppose it's really now getting into walking the talk. If that makes sense. It's like I've done a lot of focusing on trying to set up what I'm trying to set up, in a sense of my my following, my website, social media, those sorts of things. Are trying to build a brand as a coach. And I think sometimes as you say, you can sometimes go all in the other way. And I think what's important to me now is to demonstrate to myself that I'm actually doing what I actually believe in as well. So those sort of things that are important to me, in a sense of, and I think it's being allowing myself to go into places that you say that genuine yourself. So for example, where the house I moved to has got this massive garden. So it's getting into gardening. It's doing things that I think that I like, that just do interest me, that are exciting to me, that intrigue me, and not being afraid to go into stuff. So it's like, I was at a session yesterday, actually, again with my business mentor set up a session for all of her clients, and we just did a 1-day course, a 1-day session, you could say, just going over some stuff. And I was reflecting on it earlier today, actually, because in this group, I'm the only man. I'm the only guy in the group of all the women. And yesterday was maybe sort of 25 plus women, a few online, and it was myself. And you could ask that question. It's like, am I in the right room here? And you can think, a lot of the times, am I the odd one out? Am I really here? But I was absolutely in the right room because I was surrounded by the people that I wanted to be surrounded by, who shared the similar sort of values, ideas, ways of being that I did. And it was important to me. It's important to me now that I show up in those situations, that I don't allow a surface, thinking, or a surface reason or as a get out or an excuse not to do something. It's really about sort of, following through on the things that benefit me. So from a personal perspective, that's what's important to me, is to really get back into those things that enable me to be myself. And then in relation to a wider sense of what's important, it is making those connections with people. It is being able to work with people to enable to do that themselves, and to hopefully open up what they've been putting off for maybe a year, 10 years plus, and thinking, well, you actually can do it. And yourself from the thing is from coaching, it's like, I'm not telling anyone to do anything. It's not about telling, there's no grading, there's no scoring, there's no pass or fail with this. It's just giving people that space that they can enable themselves to do whatever they want to do.
And in that same respect, what is it that you're putting off yourself, James, right now?
Oh, now that's a great question. I think what I'm putting off right now is there's still an element of trepidation, I'd say, when starting out as a small business. I think yesterday, as I said, that group I went to yesterday, I tell you what I was putting off, and this is really honest, sense of like, I was putting off really nailing the flag to the mast of who my client was, who I really wanted to work with. And I suppose it was a breakthrough, a bit of a yesterday, in a sense of, and I suppose I still haven't formally said it, if you know what I mean. At time of recording this was like, to say that actually the people I want to work with are women, and I haven't explicitly put that out there yet. And it was kind of like, I was very much sort of like, on the fence, or do I want to work with men? Do I want to work with people? But the interesting thing is from that is my following, or the people who are engaging with me, nearly 70% are women, through whatever actions I've taken, non-deliberate or deliberate, but that's the true following. They're the people I seem to have the most connection with. If I'm thinking, the people women that seem to be the people who I've had the most impact on, whether I've been working with them in a group or individually. And it's so that's the thing that I suppose that I haven't fully committed to yet. And I suppose, in sense of the reason why I'm holding back on it, I suppose there is that thing of like, there's the two sides of looking at it. When you say, yeah, this is me, this is it now, I'm in, it's quite a freeing thing. But there's also that little bit of holding back, in sense of like, well, am I going, you always have that thought in your head, am I going to alienate half the population? Which isn't the case, but it's going through that sort of process, and that because this is the sort of the counter argument to that. Oh, I'm going to annihilate all these people. Is like, no, the people who I will be able to serve the best need to hear it from me. So it's really, the argument is like, no, I owe it to the women that will benefit from working with me to tell them. And so you're kind of taking it away from yourself. It's not about me. And that's one of the biggest things I think of learning of that. Well, it's not, being a coach isn't about you, about myself at any point. And that's the biggest thing, is trying to, when you're getting out of your own way, it's like, it's not about me, it's about my clients or my potential clients.
And you mentioned right at the beginning why you're doing this, and that the purpose was pure conversation.
Mm.
Now, explain to me what you see pure conversation as being.
It's very much like what this at the moment. It is the ability and the two people or a group, generally two people, I think, when you get in real conversation, is in enabling someone to think freely and speak freely, and to and especially really there's it when we say listening, but listening without the judgment, because we can have conversations where they're back and forths and stuff, but in a sense of like just in sort of general speak and things like that. But when I'm like in a real conversation, it's like it's the curiosity about it. If someone is genuine, when I'm asking a question, I want to see the genuine person. So I want to be genuinely interested, not pretending I'm interested. I really want to know where they're coming from this. And I actually find I like conversations with people who are absolutely enthralled by what they do. They're just so committed to it, that you can just hear it from them. You can even feel it from them, that they're so like. One of the most recent conversations I had with someone, kind of in the world that I'm in a little bit, was a triathlete coach, and he's been doing it for the last 20 years, and you could see it in every single fiber on him that meant everything to him, along with some of the other stuff in a sense of like, he would say his family and things like that. But when we got talking about his specific thing of what he does, that true conversation is just where the person like myself, you don't know what you're going to say next almost. That's real conversation, that people will open up and they will tell you something. And it's not pre-rehearsed, because I used to, just to sort of counter that, when people used to ask me, and you maybe come across yourself maybe in years go by, when you meet someone, and especially now when you're new, and say, oh, what do you do? I'm a life coach. And you say, oh, why do you do that? And sometimes it's the very cliche sort of, oh, I just like to help people. And it's so sort of, again, it's so surface. It's, to be, it's so Miss World or Miss Universe. Oh, it's just so, but it's because you're just scared of really saying what you want to say, and it going into that detail. So it's like, that's not a real conversation. That's just so, and because the thing is, like, I think everyone, or 99% of people, want to help each other. It's not a new thing to say you want to help someone. Someone who's in any industry, we're helping someone do something in the end. So the real conversation to me is getting underneath it and going, well, actually, allow someone to tell their story, and allow them, and just really listen to it. And then when you, as the person listening, when you say something back, or reflect back on it, or ask another question, it just enhances the conversation as well. And it was one of those things, I think, where where conversation can get frustrating, or when it's not necessarily what I would say pure conversation, is when there's an agenda on one side to try and demonize, or somehow reduce the other. Like, there's always a sort of, like, you see it now, unfortunately, and I think it's like with videos, it's like, oh, such and such destroys such and such. There's always like or like the loaded question, versus an open question. Trying to catch someone out isn't conversation. That's that's not adding to discourse, or trying, or discussion, or trying to elevate. It's just trying to catch people out. That's not, to me, that's not real conversation. Real conversation is being able to listen, reflect back, ask another interesting question, to be curious about what the other person thinks.
And I'm curious to hear, you mentioned earlier about wondering whether you were in the right room with your various other colleagues. And you said that you had an alignment of values with one another. Now, I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I've got curiosity, connection, commitment, generosity as values that come out. But I'm curious to know what you say your core values are.
Yeah, no, absolutely, the ones you've just said. definitely resonate with me. I suppose the first one for me, real sort of core value that always comes back to me is fairness. It's like that, and again, it comes back even to the sense of conversation or anything. It's like I really do feel that it's like I want things. When I say fairness, I want people to have their fair share of the conversation, their fair go at something. It's like the sort of treatment of people in sense of fairness, the sort of um, whether it be opportunity, whether it be the say, like for example, like given that example again of me being in that room, it was completely fair to me being in that room. It wasn't anything, So it's that sort of sense of everyone is in that sort of position of like I treat everyone in that same way. I expect to be treated in a way that it's like that it's as fair to me, or I'm treating someone in that way as well. So fairness it just screams out of me that it has to be that way. And I suppose another one that always when I ever do this exercise, and I do it quite frequently, is just joy. In a sense of like trying to find enjoyment in the situation. And I think when it came back to sort of like, for example, go back to the examples I gave, where it's like, I'm going to get in, I'm going to get into running, or I'm going to get into coaching, or the wider sort of personal development space. Public speaking. I'm one of the, when people say, "Oh, your biggest fear is public speaking," I'm the opposite. I'm like, "Oh no, I'll give that a go. I actually quite enjoy it." So that sort of like it's finding that joy in something, and I don't say sometimes you think about what you don't like to know what your values are, and the example I gave in that when I used to take people out running and someone say they'd be out for them for half an hour, they go, "I really don't like running. Why are you here?" I do it because I enjoy it and I get joy from it. So I try as much as I can to find the joy in things that I do, or do the things that bring me joy. And I suppose that the last one, I can't remember if it's on your list or not. I'm trying to think in a sense of like, because they're constantly changing, but it really is in a sense of, I think it's it's connection. I think it really is that sort of, whether that comes again across with curiosity, but that connection is really sort of an important thing for me in the sense of like making people feel connected. That it's so, it can't just be one way. Do you know what I mean? It's sense of I may feel connected to someone, but do they have a real connection? And can I get that real connection with people? Because again, it's one of those things that I think I've learned over the years with all those different things that I've done. Whether it be getting into marathon running and then into triathlon, getting into the world of personal development, coaching, all that stuff is great on an individual basis. But it's the people I've met and the connections that I've made from literally all over the world through this one specific thing. That's where you take the most from, because it's also then you have a connection and you have almost like an individual and a shared story with those people. So whether their experience from a personal development session or a training session, a workshop, is different, but we have a shared story as well. So it's having those connections with those people, and it's not something I expected when I went, when I really started to dive into this. It wasn't something I was looking for, but it's something that's become hugely important now.
And it's really interesting that often the core values are driven from a lack, a sort of a position of discomfort early on in life. And I'm just wondering if you know the cause of why fairness is something you're championing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say absolutely. I think it's coming from a family of 5 siblings. When if you're one of 5, and we all get on great. It's three sisters and one brother. But when it's a family of 7. And it's kind of like if you're from a big family, you want to be heard, and I think it was instilled into us in a sense of from our parents. It's like everyone gets their fair share of time, and everything's equaled out in that sense of like so it's not that we didn't have that, it was just very much instilled into us when we were growing up in a sense of no, everyone gets the same, Everyone, it's divided out. It's by 5. It's that sort of, and that coming from in a sense of, and also in sense of then the other way around in sense of our contribution back, if you want to mean, when we got older, like, into the family, the sort of chores were spread out and things like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, because especially with kids, you children know everything. So you'll spot, such and such didn't do that, and I did it, So there's definitely that sort of coming from that space, I'd say, in sense of where fairness, because what I think as well, though, is like having that sort of approach set me on that path in a sense of like, well, I'll spot it quite easily when someone either is, not pulling their weight or someone's doing too much. It's kind of like, it's a bit like that as well. It's kind of like, so there's the fairness in the sense of how people are treated and how they're how I expect to be treated as well. But it's also, it's like, well, actually, there's fairness in what you do as well, and fairness in sense of like the effort you have to put in. I think it comes into me as well in sense of fairness. It's like, if I think of this more in some ways, it's like I might think, oh, I deserve an outcome, but if I really question, it's like, well, is it a fair outcome for the effort that I've put in? So it kind of comes in that way as well, in the sense of that fairness. It's fairness in the sense of like, sometimes you don't get the outcome you think it may be deserved, but you got to have that foundation of, well, did you put in the work that deserves the potential outcome? So that, I think that's where it really comes from, is that fighting in that, in fighting of a family of 5, and then with my parents 7.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting, isn't it, that there's always a reason that people can find the origins behind what really drives them from within. It's been a fabulous conversation, James. How would people get hold of you now that you've described your perfect niche of people who you want to work with? How could they reach out and connect with you?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amy. So people can find me on both Facebook and on Instagram at James Dean Coaching. And you can also find me at jamesdeancoaching.com. Or again, the other place I'll be on is on LinkedIn. So again, it's just James Dean. So this is where the name does become handy in a sense of remembering. So that's where you'll find me across all platforms.
Fabulous. Well, I wish you all the best with your life coaching career. It is a fabulous space to be in. As you know, I'm in that space. It is just a wonderful space. And yes, I mean, infancy, it's great. Look how far you can go with it. It's going to grow as you grow. And it's a incredible journey that you take other people on. So, and that, again, that is part of the contribution piece. That's part of the purpose piece, is that you feel that you're contributing towards all these other lives.
Absolutely.
So do you have, well, firstly, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have some final words for the audience, please?
Yeah, so my sort of final words is it's going to maybe echo some of the things I said before, but it really is now, I think, there's always an opportunity to ask yourself what's really important to you, and what's important for you to, in order for you to get that, what's important now for you to do that. And to keep asking yourself that question, what's really important? Because if you ask yourself that question enough, it will give you the guide to get there.
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.